And I think this goes for anybody, whether you're a therapist or rev cycle person, is just making sure your team just stays curious. Like just asking why. Like, why do we do it that way? Why does that number look smaller than that number? Right? Just asking the questions, because then it just opens the door to finding potential opportunities for improvement. Kick it.
In the physical therapy world, I'm starting to notice a rivalry of sorts. It's team in-house billing versus team third-party billing. And people get very passionate about maybe some of the processes they run their clinic. But let's just start off with maybe some initial thoughts of maybe what are some things that people need to think about if they're considering either in-house billing versus a third-party biller.
All right, let's do it.
Great. Okay. So what's the first thing you think about when you think of in-house billing?
When I think of in-house billing, I think of you're a startup, you're a smaller practice. You've you've got someone that you've known for a while. Either you're doing it yourself, or you've got someone who is kind of helping you not only do billing, but maybe they're helping you do a little bit of everything. Maybe they're a Swiss Army knife, and they don't have enough to have them full time on the billing side. And so really get in house. I mean, there's definitely comfort. You have that person there. They understand all the therapists that are in the practice. They understand the uniqueness of your practice. Um, but there's also there's the flip side of that, right? That's another person to manage, it's another person to keep up with. You don't really have much redundancy. I'm assuming you have one person, right? Even if you have two, you don't have a lot of redundancies. If someone's out, they want to take a vacation, be gone for a week, you've got to solve for, okay, who's the backup? There's an administrative layer to that part of it. The other piece is there's so many things that constantly change. So unless you have someone who is constantly in tune with all the payers that come and go in your practice, you have to make sure that, you are staying up to date on all that, and that it's not just doesn't catch up to you. And that's hard, because payers are constantly changing their rules. And so you just got to know that your team, if it's one person, two people, or half a person, that they can not only manage the day-to-day flow, but they can also stay up to date on all the things that are going to impact your practice.
That is true. I've noticed that many billers acquire billing knowledge through repetition and then kind of conventional wisdom from working in RCM. It's not really like a degree per se. So sometimes that can even limit the amount of people in a market qualified to even handle billing. I guess a question that comes to mind is, have you ever seen any clinics try to scramble after losing their one biller? And what does that chaos look like from an RCM perspective?
Oh, for sure. Well, backing up, yeah, if they offered rev cycle as a degree in college, I don't know that anybody would sign up for it. So that's probably why everybody falls into it, like myself. But yeah, um, let's just say you've got one person, you're in a rhythm, things are going good. They know that you bill weekly. They make sure every claim is clean. They're rounding with the therapist. Did you get everything signed, documented, all the things? And there's just a general, rhythm to the pattern of life that you have with that person. And then that person, maybe their spouse gets a better job somewhere else, and now they've got to move and leave your practice. Maybe they have, they got a better offer somewhere else, and they're gonna level up. It's a lot because you're losing all that knowledge. And to your point, you don't go to school for it, right? Everybody kind of falls into the revenue cycle world. And it's not just billing, there's so many components to it. And I think a lot of times what most people don't realize is when you do remove that knowledge out of your practice, it's more than just they knew what United Healthcare was doing. They knew all the different patterns. They knew the authorization process. They knew the end to end, all the components of rev cycle. And so it can be very disruptive, especially if you don't have a lot of time to have overlaps. If you can't find someone, and revenue cycle talent is hard to find, especially good talent. If you don't have someone in the seat to cover the gap as that other person leaves, you're going to have to cover a large knowledge gap for a while until you find someone to come in. And that person is, again, reacclimating to all the nuances of your practice. So it can be very disruptive, if you don't have a plan in place to be prepared for it.
Gotcha. From a numbers perspective, I've never thought of it, but like, let's say again, we're staying on this thing of you have one biller, that biller has to leave, whether of retirement, maybe they get sick with something, you know, and they do leave. What does that even look like from an AR perspective, or how does that like affect the money side of the billing
Yeah.
for how long should they expect, that stream hose that you talk about to be affected?
The water hose.
The
Well,
water. Well,
yeah, I mean, I think it depends on how long you're out a person, right? So if you're out a person for a while, it can be very disruptive. But if you're not out someone too long, the bigger concern would just be the payment posting piece. So, as long as you can get claims out the door, right? If claims stop, obviously you're going to have some sort of diminish in your revenue stream. Like to your point, that water hose example. But as long as claims are going out, the bigger piece would just be posting and understand what's coming in. And then if there's any gaps in posting, you got delays, you're behind. It's just like any accounting process. If accounting process gets behind, and let's just say a payer's doing a retraction or recoupment, that's really hard to track down on where did that come from. If it's not posted, you don't have a tie, basically a reconciliation to every dollar in your bank account. So you try to make sure that as people come and go in your practice from an employee standpoint, that you just do not have large gaps in your processes because even if the money never stops, because a lot of practice owners, I think, get comfortable with like, well, the money's in my bank, so I'm okay. It's like, yeah, but have you tied out every dollar and even every penny? Because if you haven't, and then things like recoupment start happening from payers or other things start happening, next thing you know, you have no idea like how to tell that out. And the last thing you want to do is do accounting processes in arrears because you have to go back. It's just painful. It's a lot more forensic than just routine. And so again, it just starts to compound and snowball the more, the more time you have between in-house folks.
gotcha. Another thing I've always thought about is like how many claims can one in-house biller actually manage in a week before errors start to creep in? Like how large of a practice can one biller or even two billers? What can they do?
Oh, that's a good question. I don't have a silver bullet answer. I will say that obviously, the cleaner everything is, and the more accountability is being driven by the client, by the practice owner, is super helpful. Because if you have a strong practice owner or someone who has the authority to drive the accountability, it's going to help everybody. So again, if you have, let's say, you have that weekly setup where you're waiting at the end of the week and you're going to send all the claims out in one day, and that's giving everybody kind of, let's just call it 4.5 days to get everything in. They can probably do a lot more because it's a pretty clean process. No, I wouldn't encourage people to do it weekly. I'd encourage to do it daily if you can, because all you're doing is just holding up revenue. But let's just say if everything is clean in that weekly example and everything goes out, they can probably do quite a bit. I don't know what quite a bit is. It's hard. That's really practice specific because if you're doing a lot more PT versus you're doing a lot more speech claims, obviously that could differ a little bit. That could be pretty good. But if you have clinicians, maybe they take 2 weeks to finish their documentation. There's not a good accountability. There's people coming and going. You have a lot of people who are 1099s coming in, right? Like I know we personally have practice owners who do employ a lot of 1099s because they can't find solid long-term people in their area. Well, they literally look at their payroll and determine their payroll simply by how many notes are closed because 1099 sometimes don't. They don't close their notes as quickly as they should or do thorough documentation. So the cleaner the rev cycle process is, the more someone can do from a revenue cycle perspective. The non-clean or non-leanness of it, that's not really a term, but the complexity of it is really going to drive what the output's going to be.
Gotcha. It was just in my head, I was like, man, if I had to post thousands of, I mean, it'd have to be a very large clinic. But even if you had to do like 100 visits a day, that would be pretty hard. So I just don't know the process, but I was always thinking about that. Let's see. With going back to, you talk about how payers are constantly changing and how there's not a degree. And sometimes I feel like even the information out there is so not visible. With the rules shifts constantly happening in rehab, how realistic is it for one internal biller to keep up with denials, the payer changes, and compliance updates? Like, where are they supposed to get their information?
They can get their information from a lot of places. I mean, obviously, the big thing would be from a Medicare perspective. It would be working with your Medicare administrator or MAC. So if you're in Florida, I believe that's First Coast. So just making sure that you're subscribed to all the portals, you're getting all the newsletters, you're getting all the updates in terms of the rules that they're going to change on you. So make sure you're getting that. Obviously, the same goes for commercial or private insurance. Making sure that you're getting the information that you need from your commercial payers. Sometimes that means having a monthly call. Sometimes that means having a quarterly call because they're not just going to graciously give you a list of all the rules that changed and tell you how to deal with it. they're going to change things. They may retroactively change things. We just heard from a practice owner this past week where something she'd been doing for years, the payer just changed. Well, they didn't just change it saying, hey, today forward. They changed it and said, oh, no, we're going to go all the way back till, 3 years ago, 4 years ago. And so she actually campaigned and fought against that and actually got it put back in place. And of course, when they put it back in place, it was just effective from that date. It didn't retro. So, the big thing about payers and just managing those folks is just having a week, having some sort of cadence, either a phone call, or you getting updates via a newsletter or an email. If you're not, then you can just assume things are happening that you don't know about. That's really key to make sure the in-house folks just have a constant pulse on what's happening in their payers and to know who to call, right? Lots of times, like even our team will say, hey, I talked to this really good person over at United. Well, we make sure and bookmark who that person is because they kind of become a trusted advisor for us that we can call. And then we share that name and obviously that number because it's just someone who kind of speak the truth about what's going on behind the curtain. And the same goes for in-house folks, staying on top of that. Denials are a big thing. If the same person is working the same denials over and over, the thought should be that they would see the trend and sense for the trend. And then that in that case, you'd obviously make sure that you're putting a rule in place or something or adding a modifier, whatever that change is, to prevent those denials. You obviously don't want someone who's like just going to keep working denials and not realize that they can put something in place. So it's really, really key to make sure that person is thinking proactively. How do I prevent this? Really, just like how do I work myself out of a job? Because you'll keep them around if they get rid of all rev cycle and automate it. But you definitely want someone thinking about how do I just stop these denials coming. You'll never stop them, but you can definitely minimize them and reduce the workload they put on your team.
Gotcha. So we've talked a little bit about in-house billing. Let's focus on third party and especially like what we're doing at Strata. What's something that we're focusing on to make sure we're up to date or is most educated and kind of relieving that stress from some of these practice owners.
So we have a team. We have a dedicated team that they constantly work with all the Macs. They work with all the commercial payers. We're looking at not just a client specific thing. We're also looking at things geographically located. So if you're a practice in Florida, we obviously have a big footprint in Florida. We're constantly interacting with all those payers, so we know if it's going to impact one practice, it's probably going to impact everybody that deals in that region or that area. We're sensing for macro trends too. We're looking at different things that are happening. Previous episodes we've talked about undercoding or downcoding that's happening kind of silently. We're seeing that we're seeing that obviously at a macro level and what that's doing. We also know the payers at a macro level that are not doing that. And so, but we're also looking for, various trends within the practices. So we know we can triangulate on specialties. So if somebody's is speech heavy or they're OT heavy, right? We can also look at those different dimensions by practice and start to look across kind of not only vertically, but horizontally across practice types to see how people are being impacted. And obviously, because we're a bigger group, we can pivot pretty quickly. We can make changes pretty quickly to make sure that our customers don't continue to suffer from different payer behavior or changes in the market.
Awesome. So in terms of reporting, what are some blind spots that someone with in-house billing might have compared to a third-party biller?
That's a really good question. I think in-house, what teams can do is get very granular and just like what's right in front of them, and so they may not think about, hey, let's look at the AR over time. Really, really, I think the thing I'd be really mindful of the in-house billers or RCM teams is like, are they able to lift up and look over the horizon, right? Because every other week or every week, the daily grind, you can sometimes miss that you're seeing a trend or you're seeing things get worse. You might not be looking. You think about that like, hey, look, our AR in 0 to 30 looks pretty good. They might not realize they have some accounts floating into 60, 90 plus, which that becomes the danger zone, right? The 90, 91 plus. So I would just say making sure you have solid AR reporting. Can you do an aging report showing it in buckets of aging, keeping tabs on things floating downstream, getting further out of reach? Can are you looking at denials at a high level? Are you just looking at onesie, twosie, or just work them as they come? Nothing is just thinking about, looking at like what is the system doing? Like, is your RCM team looking at your EMR system? Is it enabling them to be as efficient as possible? The little things that you could change on the front end. Other thing, from a denial standpoint, is looking at your authorizations. Like a lot of rules are changing around auths and getting authorization for treatment, and so making sure that you're able to report on that. Are you seeing it by payer? Are you seeing it, by treatment specialty? Different things that you're doing. just making sure you have solid reporting to tackle some of that. And a lot of EMRs that we encounter that aren't Strata, some of the complaints we get are the limited reporting. They can't get things out of the system. The way it maybe renders them in the system doesn't give them the story they need or the view they need. So I would just say making sure that you're able to get out what you can. Even if you got to go to the database and export it yourself and try your best to pivot it in Excel or Sheets, I just say anything's better than nothing. Just make sure you're not just you're being satisfied with what you got. Like always, question like, can I get this better? Can I pivot it in a different way? Just so you can see things at a higher level than just what's right in front of you.
Awesome. A lot of owners say they feel loyalty to their biller because they've been with them forever. Keaton, how does loyalty help or hurt something like a business or a practice like this?
Sure. Well, I always think about the family business framework of, family businesses are typically only as strong as their weakest link. And you always find an excuse to keep bringing your family members along, right? And so the big thing I think if you've had somebody with you forever, just like anybody, we get comfortable. We just trust that person. We never, we over time, we stop verifying that what they're doing is the right thing. Hey, they know what they're doing. They're fine. Or they know what the goals are for this year. They're fine. Just again, I would say having that comfort is a great thing, but also being able to have those harder, candid conversations with them, it becomes tougher over time as you get comfortable. So I just say make sure that you are aligned with them. I mean, at the end of the day, no matter how comfortable we are with someone, we still want to know what are the goals, what's the vision, what's happening, that kind of thing. And people want to know how they're going to be held accountable because nobody wants to have a surprise one day and we've been working together for 10 years. Like, what changed? It's like, well, over time, something did change and the paths went away from each other, but nobody talked about it. So I think it's just really key to have daily, weekly conversations with the person's been with you forever. Just to say, hey, how are we doing? Can you show, right? Okay, great. Or AR is great. What are you looking at to see that? Again, that trust verify piece. It's just, hey, tell me what's going on and then show me what you're looking at. Because also as a practice owner, you may be like, you know what, we need to make a change here. Maybe we need a new EMR to see things better or change our workflows. But until you have that person, have those conversations with your trusted people, you may not, you may just hear from them that things are fine and things are good. And maybe they are, but things could probably be better. And that just becomes in having those conversations where you're verifying what they're looking at. And maybe you're making things better for them and things don't change. Or maybe you're like, hey, my whole business needs to change. And we just gotten a little too comfortable.
Gotcha. So let's say you are in-house, but you switch to third party, but you still have this biller. Is there a way you could repurpose their role and still keep them working for your business?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, anytime somebody comes to Strata, we do everything end to end. We hear that conversation. Well, I've got this person. They've been with me for a while. And, we often say, well, can you repurpose, to your point, can you repurpose them? Maybe they can just handle the authorization load that's growing. Maybe they can handle, be the conduit between the therapist and Strata or RevCycle. Maybe they can do something else in your practice, run a different administrative layer. Maybe they could do that. But you definitely want to make sure if they got a lot of knowledge, they've been a great team member for you. I would encourage you to definitely find a way to keep them around. Maybe they're tech savvy, maybe they're running around looking at, can we automate processes? Can we, maybe do things in the practice to make it just a better run business. We always find a way to try to repurpose those folks so they're good folks for sure.
Gotcha. Something with accountability. How does an owner even check like their biller's work just to make sure things are, going right? Because if someone's like, "Hey, it looks great," you talked about that earlier. Like, how do you check and have that second pair of eyes to make sure, things are, sailing smoothly?
Yeah, I think I always go back to checking your payer contracts. Like, what are you contractually obligated to? Your RCM person may just be posting everything that comes in from Cigna. Well, what I would say is, hey, just come behind, do a small subset. Let's look at payments in the last 3 months for Cigna and see if you see a pattern. And maybe you're owed $100 contractually, and you're saying, okay, my person's posting $100. We're getting $100. But then you start maybe seeing a $75 payment here and there, or an $80 payment. Dig into those and figure out what's going on there. Because what we have seen is for whatever reason on the payer side, maybe their systems or they're updating their systems and something's going on, or maybe they just changed a rule. You never know. You might be getting underpaid every second or third claim for whatever reason. And so, but until you come behind and say, let me look at just, one payer or one patient, let me just look at it and see what I see and just see what pops up. Again, some of the underpayment, that what we call payment integrity, some of those things can pop up, but you would never know unless you looked at it over a certain amount of time, right? If you just, if you're saying, hey, this payment looks weird for, Mrs. Smith on this data service, and you only look at that one thing, you may miss the fact that that's the third payment that gets underpaid. Her next two might be fine, and then that other one may not. But until you start looking at things over time, it's really hard to understand if your people are seeing that and catching that. We've seen owners even do their own payment contract modeling sheets in Excel, and they have found those very things that their team didn't see. Because again, if this kind of goes back, if your team is just heads down, knocking out payments and posting payments, they may not realize, like, wait a minute, that was a smaller amount than normal. So, and that just goes to your practice owners too. And I think this goes for anybody, whether you're a therapist or rev cycle person, is just making sure your team is just stays curious, like just asking why, like, why do we do it that way? Why does that number look smaller than that number? Right? Just asking the questions, because then it just opens the door to finding potential opportunities for improvement.
Gotcha. I know with a typical owner, sometimes they're trading, sometimes they're not. They're also dealing and managing people, the front desk, and maybe grumpy, patients, with a bill. Like, how often should they be checking on their RCM side so that they're informed, but maybe not overwhelmed? Because some people never even look at their contracts, but like, how involved should they be to make sure this is running smoothly without burning themselves out?
I mean, I think they didn't ask themselves, like, what do they think they need to get comfortable with, right? It's also depending on the size of the practice, but I'm a big frameworks guy. I would say, making sure that you have frameworks in place. Again, maybe it's a monthly check that you're just pulling up data, random sampling, looking just to verify to see if you see anything for your team. But I'd say at the minimum, if you have an in-house team, just making sure you're rounding with them weekly, right? Like, what are we seeing? Is there anything going on every other week if things are running really smooth? But it should be a very structured, you know, very short call if you can. Maybe it's just 30-minute check-in with your RCM team, right? What are the two or three good things that have happened? Maybe you negotiate a higher rate with the payer, or maybe you've stopped, some authorization denials. Like, let's talk about one or two good things. Then ask them, like, what are one or two complications we're seeing, right? Maybe there's a new denial popping up. We've got a new auth requirement. Got to solve these things. Great. Ask the question, what are you solving for? What is your timeline to get it done? And then that way you can check in with them, like, did you get it done? And then I think, you close your call just saying, hey, what do the next 30, 60, 90 days look like for our practice? Are there things that you need my help with, right? As an owner, is there someone who's habitually late on their documentation? Do you need me to nudge them? Like, what do you need me to do? Maybe you're seeing a shift in your mix. Maybe there's a lot more self-pay. Maybe there's a lot more your patient liability portion. You're not collecting up front. Maybe you got to change the whole process. Talk through those things. But I'd say bare minimum every other week, you need to be checking in with your RCM team.
Perfect. Just one or two more questions. How often do you see billing become kind of like the silent anchor slowing down a clinic's growth? Whether it's in-house or just specifically, like if a team's not doing what it needs to do.
Yeah, I mean, I'd say again, going to the rev cycle continuum. So thinking about from intake or referral all the way until a claim is resolved, be looking at every single piece. So, for example, we have a customer who is very focused on the administrative flywheel that they have built in their practice. And I think they have quite a few locations. But one of the things that person is looking for very specifically is from a scheduling intake perspective, how do I remove as much friction as possible? Like, how do I get people in here? Because they're just focused on, I want to saturate my clinic schedule, and then as I get saturated, I either open up more locations or add more therapists or whatever I do. So just be thinking about your business in terms of rev cycle touches all of them. So, okay, great. I'm removing friction from the scheduling piece. So maybe I've got a way to bulk schedule, add 12 appointments out of the gate, right? I'm doing reminders, keeping my calendar full, reducing my cancellations. And then as you get that calendar full, now you're going to think about, okay, now who do I need authorizations for? How do I iron out that process? Make sure it's completely optimized, and we're not getting denials. We're getting auth for the right thing, right? We're not getting an auth for OT. We're getting it for PT or speech. Making sure that you think about every step in the process is rev cycle related, essentially. And then on the back end, there's the big thing is just, are you keeping up with your payment posting? Are you keeping up with denials? Is your team organized? Maybe they need more organization, so they keep things in front of them. So don't just think about, what I would say is, as a practice owner, don't just think about rev cycle as just billing, because there's so many components to it. And then also think about your clinicians. Or your eval is taking 60 minutes or taking longer than that. Think about your throughput, right? So every piece impacts the revenue cycle and whether you can scale and grow and get paid for doing what you're doing.
Perfect. Last question. So let's say someone's shopping around for new EMRs, and a lot of EMRs do have RCM, like third party services. What are the things you should be looking for in a potential third party billing partner?
You should be thinking about how invested are they, because in your business, the biggest thing that happens in rev cycle when you get a partner to handle it for you is you're giving your pocketbook or your wallet to them, essentially, right? Even though the money's coming in, it's going to your bank account as a practice owner, they're still dictating how much money goes into that bank account. And so I just say, as you think about how are they incentivized, right? You show me the incentives, I'll show you the behavior. So making sure that as you partner with someone, the incentives are there for them to be as efficient and collect as much as they can for you, obviously in a very compliant way. And so when you think about us, we partner to where we are incentivized with you to care about your practice as much as you do. And I think that's the big thing. Is just, are you getting good communication from that team? What is the structure of that team? Are parts of your rev cycle getting farmed out to just a big AR team, a big auth team, a big, denials team, and they never really understand your payers and your nuances, compared to what we do, which is we take a very, very surgical approach of, we look at your business and the dimensions of your business, and we try to pair that up with the knowledge on our side. And so that muscle memory is built through repetition. So we can stay just as ahead of your rev cycle as you would if you were doing it. So just being thinking about how is the partner that's going to do your rev cycle structured? How many check-ins do you have? How are they incentivized? Those are really key things to ask when you're talking to a rev cycle partner.
Great. Well, thanks for joining me, Casey. I'm glad we had this conversation about billing.
Likewise, good to be here.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Strata Stories. StrataPT combines your EMR and billing into one automated system to increase revenue and achieve a 99.99% reimbursement rate for physical, occupational, and speech therapy clinics. If you'd like to learn more about StrataPT and see how our EMR and billing services work, head over to stratapt.com to book a demo.